advice that I would give to undergraduates pursuing their career is, I think particularly when you're starting out and your responsibilities are maybe relatively low based on what you're going to have for the rest of your life, do what you want and kind of just base it all on passion. Just like what are your kind of core interests, and spend some time when you're at school thinking about that. You kind of have space where you don't have to worry about the kind of day-to-day of just like a normal job. You're able to kind of explore different interests. So I would really kind of take that time. I mean, if I think about myself in undergrad, and I think about just kind of like the different opportunities that were out there. I mean, that there's so much now that, like, I'm older, looking back to when I was an undergrad at Penn and the college, I'm like, man, I just wish I had taken advantage of all that stuff. So kind of over-index for your interest, what you're engaged in, and your passions, and that'll lead you to good places. It's a good question. Actually, it was a friend from Penn who I knew as an undergrad. He had started a company, moved out to Silicon Valley, raised some money for it, and he had a group of advisors helping him with the project. One of his advisors was Chris Larson, who is one of the co-founders of Ripple. So I ended up connecting with the team through him. And once I had met the team, I was familiar with Bitcoin and kind of concepts around blockchain. I think I originally found Bitcoin just through Hacker News and kind of reading some of the forums and kind of getting used to some of the ideas. I had been interested in payments for a long time. Actually, at Penn, I wrote my thesis on remittances. So flows of money moving from working families in the United States back into South America. My parents were South American, so there's kind of a personal tie to it. So I kind of had this interest in payments, and there was a lot of overlap between kind of the initial use cases for blockchain technologies and things like Bitcoin and payments. And so when I encountered Ripple, and it was really the first company that I heard talk about the idea of kind of a protocol for this movement of value, and it just seemed like it was going to be transformative. I think at the time of my life too, I was like in my 20s. I just wanted to do something kind of out there and radical, so it seemed like a good fit. The question of like, hey, how has Ripple actually helped for just everyday use cases? And if I'm a family, in the U.S. and I'm sending money back to Mexico, like, what impact has this technology had? I think there's two sides to that. Like, one, we're at a really early stage for the development of all this technology. So people often use the comparison to the internet and saying that, okay, right now in 2017, 2018, we're maybe at 93 or 94 of where the internet was, and then you kind of like got this explosion over time. I think that's generally true. I think the way that you move things forward is by having a focus, like just really taking in a razor-like focus on solving one specific problem and solving that problem really, really well. And the focus that we have is really on cross-border payments. And that focus has really behooved us just to make sure that we get traction in the marketplace. So we're not doing kind of 1,000 different things at once. It's always kind of like one core problem and understanding the customers who have that problem really, really well. And so while it's still early days, I mean, there have been initiatives that I think are really reaching real people. So we do work with Western Union and MoneyGram, who are some of the largest remittance companies in the United States. We've also partnered with the Gates Foundation on creating an open source payment system that they're releasing into multiple emerging markets that will really kind of help with financial inclusion there. So listen, I don't want to overstate the way that this technology has impacted financial inclusion. I think there's still a long way to go and a lot of work to do, but you're starting to see some of those initial seeds and kind of initial areas of traction, and that's what really matters in the early days, is like, where's the momentum? Is there something that's catching on? Is that flywheel getting going? And we're totally getting there. I mean, there's about 120 customers and different financial institutions around the world that are using Ripple now, and you'll see that grow over time. It's a good question. So, where can Ripple go beyond just cross-border payments? One, we think cross-border payments is a huge market. I mean, total FX volume, so foreign exchange volume, like just different currencies that move around the world every day, is about $5 trillion on a daily basis, on a 24-hour basis. So that's huge. That's a lot of money that moves around the world. So we're actually very happy focusing on cross-border payments, probably for a long time. Again, just as a company, as a single company, we think it's good to preserve like an operational focus and discipline. I think what you will see us do is start to invest in other companies that focus on different use cases. And we think that's how, some of this ecosystem will grow over time, is kind of allowing for different companies to be created that can kind of focus on their own specific applications, set of problems, and customers as well. Yeah, sure. So when you're thinking about decentralization in terms of blockchains, I think the question is really around security, right? So if you have a system that can confirm transactions, making sure that confirmation is actually decentralized among as many stakeholders as possible. Although Ripple is a company, right, and there is kind of like that one central company, Ripple doesn't control, say, the XRP ledger, which is a distributed blockchain. So there are about 70 validators today that contribute to the consensus mechanism in the XRP ledger. Ripple does run some of those servers. We have published a decentralization strategy that will actually remove Ripple from that as well, even further. So we think distributed systems, listen, they're very difficult. No one's figured out the perfect answer yet. You look at proof of work in Bitcoin, and there are external factors that produce centralization in it, like just access to computing power and ASIC mining, as well as access to cheap electricity, where you have kind of a very few set of mining pools. And so I think you'll kind of see this discourse evolve over time, and Ripple has definitely made design decisions where we're trying to really have this as distributed as possible. I think what's great about this space is that it's totally open access. A lot of these APIs to interact with, the XRP blockchain or Ethereum or Bitcoin, these are open access APIs. Anyone with an internet connection can go begin using them. So I would just encourage us to get started. Get your hands dirty, start playing with it, start coding different things. And I think outside of that, when you start thinking about, hey, how am I going to focus this into maybe an actual project or initiative or a business? Just think about a core problem that you can solve and which customers have that problem, and understand that customer really, really well to get traction.
Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So Raised by Us is it's a nonprofit. It is actually slightly payments related. So it's a program by which it allows companies and the employees at those companies to donate any portion of their paycheck to a charity. So when you have a job and you have a paycheck, typically portions of your paycheck are siphoned off for taxes or certain kinds of benefits. But you can also now actually do charitable payments directly from your paycheck. And the reason we thought that was interesting was just that there was a lot of commentary about how new generations of people and workers weren't as philanthropic as prior generations. And we were trying to think of very convenient, easily accessible ways that people could engage in charity and philanthropy and really engage in their interests. So to the point earlier of hey, what's your advice to college students? It's almost hey, spend time engaging in your passions. And part of that could be charitable as well. If you're passionate about disease-related things like Alzheimer's or cancer research or childhood education, those are all things that you can engage in through charities as well by donating. And that was something that we were trying to encourage with Raised by Us. So with Raised by Us, so I started Raised by Us with my friend Simon Kirk, who was an undergraduate at Penn as well. I strangely enough, given my accent, I spent a lot of time actually growing up in London. So I graduated high school in London and then came back to the States to come to Penn. Simon is from London. He's actually British. He has a British accent. I just heard him in the library, actually here in this library. So we're filming this in Van Pelt right now. So I heard an English accent, and I just said hello to him because I was like, oh, I grew up in London too. And we sort of struck up a friendship that way. And I think we kind of lost touch for a couple of years after graduation. And it was maybe 4 years or so after graduation that we ran into each other at a party in New York, and it was just totally, so we kind of sprung up that connection again. I don't know, like sometimes there are just Penn people everywhere. Particularly in New York, I think a lot of people move to New York, from Penn just because of the proximity. Yeah, so I would say just kind of keep your ears open is my advice. I mean, in terms of last comments, again, I was an undergrad at Penn in the college, spent 4 years here in Philadelphia. I look back at the time super fondly. I think I think it's a common experience for a lot of people to come from different areas of the world to Penn in Philadelphia, and then after graduation, leave Philadelphia. That was definitely my experience. I moved to New York. I've lived in London. I was living in San Francisco for a couple of years. These kinds of centers I think are pretty common, but I honestly look really fondly on my time in Philadelphia and West Philadelphia in particular. I think Philadelphia's role as maybe what's commonly referred to as a second-tier city actually gives it a lot of kind of breathing room, and everything from the music and the food that I had out here in Philadelphia. One, it was a lot cheaper to kind of just do things, and I think that bred a lot more kind of experimentation and forward-thinking things, and I've always kept that with me. So maybe one message I would give is engage with Philadelphia. It's a really amazing city. I'm glad to hear that it's been growing and doing well since I was here almost 12 years ago, and I would definitely encourage students to get off campus and spend time in this great place.